Out of that group came Kartar's book, Noah's Schizophrenia, which is the name of her son, A Mother's Search for Truth. And I just want to say, I've read many, many books in this vein throughout the years. This is truly one of the best books I've read. Kartar really illuminates the suffering and the heroism of a single parent with a young boy with schizophrenia. She explains what the Department of Mental Health offers, the gifts that they offer us, the programs they offer, and the incredible limits that the Department of Mental Health can offer us.
Excellent.
So anyway, I welcome Kartar Diamond to our speaker meeting, and I'm going to turn the meeting over to Kartar. It's truly one of the most heart-wrenching, heartfelt, and books full of knowledge I've read on being a parent of someone with a mental illness. So Kartar Diamond, it's all
Thank you.
yeah.
Can you hear me okay now?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, it is a pleasure to especially be speaking in front of the West LA NAMI group. I've spoken now to about a dozen different NAMI support groups through Zoom because of COVID this year and since the book came out in September. And so it feels like coming home, you know, like somebody who goes on tour and then they come to their home, their city that they grew up in. And so I feel very familiar already with the group. I know a few people who are on the call for sure, and I'm sure there's many more who I know who I don't see their faces yet. But almost all of our feng shui, we were talking about feng shui before, almost all of our mental health challenges with my son occurred in LA County. And that comes across, of course, in my memoir. I tried to maintain the confidentiality of certain individuals and certain hospitals and board and cares and whatnot. But a lot of people know my story because I went very regularly to the NAMI support group that was at D.D. Hirsch for a long time. And literally, some of these folks have become my friends. There are a couple people on the call who read the first and second drafts of the memoir and gave me input, which was really nice. And as I spoke at other NAMI chapters, it was very educational to find out what's going on in other parts of the country. I remember speaking to a group of mothers in Hawaii who said they don't have board and cares in Hawaii. And I spoke to a group, I believe it was in Georgia, that said they don't have IMDs there. You know, what happens when somebody's been hospitalized and presumably stabilized, then where do they go? And then I talked to some other NAMI group and they said in their county or their state that they don't have LPS conservatorship. So on the one hand, I felt like, wow, LA County's got a lot going on to serve the mental health community. But we all know that the sheer volume of people here makes it so that our mental health care system doesn't really work very expediently or effectively a lot of the time. So that comes through in my memoir. And so I wanted to, people ask me a lot, what prompted you to write this and whatnot. And a lot of people know that I'm a writer. And so this is how I express myself. And it is one way that I help reduce my stress and my coping mechanisms. And I also have felt like whatever we've been through, our family, my son in particular, the jury's still out. He's a young man now. He'll be 30 in May. And we still have a long road ahead of us. But I didn't want what had happened to us thus far to be in vain. And I really felt like if I could document our story and share it with family members, mental health care providers, maybe legislators would be nice, that something good should come of it. And I also have spoken on a regular basis through the Crisis Intervention Training Program through LA County. And I know for myself that I feel really good when I have spoken before law enforcement, the sheriffs and the police department, they have come up to me and said it really changed their attitude about mentally ill people. So I feel like, I mean, each time I've spoken there, I felt like, wow, if I changed one person's mind, if I inspired one police officer to do a 5150 instead of ignoring the situation, or instead of putting somebody in jail when they really need mental health care, then I feel like, we've done something purposeful and something really helpful. Um, so I thought, maybe right out of the gate, I would read a little excerpt from the memoir to get people kind of a flavor of what my writing style is like. And then I can go into a little bit more about just the highlights of our background and what transpired for us in the last 15 years. So I think I'll, unless there's any comments or questions in the chat box right off the bat, I think I'll go into a little of the virtual book tour review mode. And I promise I won't go on forever. I'm going to read about 4 pages. Okay, this is how it starts, folks. And this is a chapter called, "Can Someone Tell Me What Is Going On?" I think every parent can relate to that. My son stood in the living room, his hands over his head, anguish in his eyes, screaming, "Every musician in LA is stealing my ideas." I was blown away by what he said. I couldn't understand why he would make such a statement. I could tell he was upset and dead serious. So I tried to comfort him by being rational. I responded to Noah by saying, "But you don't know every musician in LA, so how could that be possible?" He was only 15 years old, and already he was an excellent musician who played in a couple of bands with schoolmates. At age 11, he formed a group called the Liquid Nixons. His delusion that adult musicians in Los Angeles were stealing his ideas seemed to come out of nowhere. Years later, I would learn that when a person is in a psychotic state, trying to be rational with the person or refuting their reality is just going to make things worse. Allowing the person to know you think their perceptions may not be grounded in reality is not a way to garner trust or de-escalate a crisis. Up until that point, my communication with my son had always been enjoyable and sympathetic, and he even once told me as a youngster that he appreciated the way I explained things to him. Not now. I couldn't comfort him at all, and he stomped off into his bedroom. Every 10 minutes that same night, Noah came out of his bedroom, which is right next to my home office, and popped his head into the room. With a glassy look in his big brown eyes and a crazed smile on his young, handsome face, he announced which rock star he had just become. I didn't know whether he was joking or not. He went back into his room, turned up the music, listened to a couple of songs from Ziggy Stardust, and then came into my office to say, "Now I am David Bowie." Minutes later, after listening to some other musical icon, he again barged in on me and stated he had become this person or that person. It was a total departure from his usual behavior. Noah already owned the image of a teen idol. At 5'6" with a lean frame, his thick shoulder-length brown hair made him look like a young Jimmy Page or Harry Styles. Later in the evening, he emerged from his bedroom just wearing his boxer shorts. He went into the living room and started whipping the couch with a belt, laughing maniacally. After a while, he quieted down, retreated to his bedroom for the rest of the evening, and I was left confused and worried. I made a phone call to his father. In retrospect, if I had understood then what I know today, I would have taken him to the hospital immediately. Of course, there was no second guessing whether or not he would have gone with me willingly. But the next day he did. We went to the emergency room. There were no other people besides us in the reception area, so I had no reason to anticipate much of a wait. But for almost 3 hours, we were mostly ignored, except for bringing my son into a small exam room to get his insurance information and to get weighed. Every 30 minutes or so, some staff person came in and lied to us about how he would be seen momentarily. Noah and I were both getting hungry and hypoglycemic. After the fourth time they tried to stall, we just left. Little did I know then, waiting for emergency psychiatric treatment can not only take hours, but sometimes even days. It would be 9 years later that my son waited 5 days in the ER at another hospital before being admitted. To add insult to injury, a few weeks later, I got a bill from the hospital ER for several $100s. I called the ER and told them, using some choice words, that no services were provided and that if they continued to try to collect a fee for no services rendered, I would report them to the state for insurance fraud. That was just the first of many frustrating episodes with hospitals and insurance companies trying to pull a fast one at my son's expense. Noah's mental breakdown in our living room that night was a culmination of increasingly bizarre behaviors spanning some months before. About 6 months before our aborted visit to the emergency room, he and I had gone out to dinner. After our meal, Noah decided to do what many teenagers do, which is walk about a half a block ahead of their parents so as not to be seen with associated parent. This is typical teenage behavior, which I found amusing, but not that night. Noah continued to walk past the parking structure where I parked the car. I stopped and waited to see how long he would continue walking without looking back at me. A block later, he finally stopped, looked back at me, and I motioned with my hand that I intended to turn left into the parking structure. I then waited for him to walk back to me. Noah was visibly annoyed. When he joined me where I waited, Noah said he didn't like the way I waved my hand. He said it was disrespectful. I chose to ignore the comment because I thought he was just being a cranky teenager, although I had to admit to myself this was a departure from his normal, courteous, affectionate, and mellow demeanor. This was the same teenager who used to refer to himself as my mini-me when he was younger. He saw the commercials on TV for the Austin Powers movie with the character played by Vern Troyer. He once coyly said to me, "I'm your mini-me, you complete me." And he did. We were buddies, but not that night. When we got home, Noah promptly sat down at the kitchen table, put his head down, and started crying. I asked him what was wrong, and he said, "I know you care about me, but you don't love me." Now, compared to his comment about not liking the way I waved my hand, this statement was really strange. I asked him why he thinks I didn't love him, and Noah struggled to be as tactful as he was distraught. He said slowly, "You don't understand me, so you can't love me." At this point, I had to admit I didn't understand him or where this surge of emotional outburst came from. So I reacted with what I thought would be a less charged response. I told him it's possible to love someone you don't understand and how that, in and of itself, is a good example of unconditional love. He didn't buy it. He wanted to make it clear to me I no longer understood him and by definition didn't love him. This was close to the summer of 2006 when just a few breadcrumbs were dropped, a trail leading up to the couch whipping incident 6 months later. Noah's personality was changing, not in a good way. Lost my place here. It was as if a different person possessed him. One day, within earshot of Noah, I called his father, who I had divorced more than 10 years prior. We had a 50-50 joint custody schedule, 1 week on and 1 week off. It never vacillated. If I had to go out of town, I did it in the week when I didn't have Noah. I could focus on him when he was at my house. I got used to this schedule eventually, but in the beginning it was rough. On the weeks when I didn't have my little boy with me, it felt wrong. My house seemed empty. I couldn't help but feel that only having my son with me every other week went against nature. A little boy should be with his mother every day. But in the imperfect world of custody arrangements, we split our child evenly, if not in half. I told myself it made more sense for him to be with me full time until he was a teenager, but I wasn't given that option. Still, I look forward to the day when he could make his own choice regarding which parent to live with. We had such a strong bond that I fantasized about him living with me just in the future, going to college at UCLA or USC. I would have also been the kind of mom to let my adult son live at home, helping him save money while pursuing his career in music. He could have turned the den into a recording studio, and I would have continued to be in awe of the amazing guitar riffs I was blessed to hear traveling throughout the house. When Noah was much older, I didn't have the heart to tell him that one of his childhood friends with unimpressive musical skills as a teen became a working musician who toured the world. Back to reality, my only consolation with the joint custody schedule was that on the weeks when he was not with me, I knew he was in the good hands with a very attentive stepmom who I liked a lot. At times, however, I cringed hearing my 6-year-old refer to his father and stepmother as, quote, his parents. Were it not for the awkwardness of having been married to the same man, she and I probably could have been good friends. Stepmom number 1 lasted for 7 years, and then stepmom number 2 took her place when Noah was about 13. Stepmom number 2 moved in only 6 months after stepmom number 1 moved out. That was a shock for Noah, for sure, but a year later he warmed up to her. How are things going at your house? Without missing a beat, Noah's father replied over the phone, "Oh, is he psychoanalyzing you as well?" We laughed. His dad then said, "Yeah, I was thinking about buying him that book, Psychology for Dummies, so that he might know what he's talking about." At that moment, I think we both chalked it up to teenage hormones, and we were not concerned, not yet. So what I tried to portray in those opening pages is how for a lot of parents, it's really confusing when the psychosis or when the first psychotic break happens, and how we look back and we think, was that it? Was that a sign? Could I have done something differently back then? And I also, wanted to convey that my son had certain stresses early in life without going into great detail. In fact, I had more than one psychiatrist say to us that divorce and bad parenting does not cause schizophrenia. So I try, to, weave into that first chapter some of the nuances, because a lot of people also say, what were the signs? Did you know? And my son was just starting to act very different. But if you don't have, clinically diagnosed mental illness already very obvious in your family tree, it's not the first place you go to. And, what happened with our family is that we thought for a while, we thought, okay, he's taking drugs. This is what's causing the crazy talk. And then we cleared through that, and we had to settle in on the reality that there's some kind of mental illness happening here. But we didn't know the extent of it. In fact, not that long ago, I rewrote my living trust and special needs trust for my son. And just in rewriting that and bringing everything up to date, I could see how little I knew and how little I understood about my son's disability. The first time I wrote a will, I thought that he was going to be perfectly fine after a while. And so we go through these stages. And what happened to me, I'm the kind of person who likes to handle things. I'm a doer. In fact, that's what the name Kartar means. It's a spiritual name, and it means the doer, one who gets things done. And so I started researching, I started trying to find things. And honestly, I did see that there was a local NAMI chapter, but I didn't want to go to it. I didn't know things were that serious, and I didn't know that I would need a support group. So it took a while for me to actually show up to a family support group. And then I kind of sat in judgment for a while because It seemed to take a long time to get around the room and have everybody share their story. And by the time that was over with, there wasn't a whole lot of time to do individual therapy with people. But I later learned that sometimes you go to a meeting just to provide support, just to hug somebody, just to be in the company of people who understand. And then sometimes you just hear one thing that can help you, solve a problem. So it's not the amount of time, it's the quality of the time for the NAMI meetings. So after a while, I don't want to give away the whole story, but after a while, it became evident that we could not handle this on our own. We had some private therapy programs and whatnot, and I thought that the appropriate thing would be to have my son live in what's called a licensed board and care for adults with mental illness. I should backtrack a little bit and say that, because he had his first psychotic break at 15 and things were in full swing by the time he was 16, we actually did send him away to a school out of state that's supposed to take care of adolescents with mental illness. Didn't work out. He got worse there. And so by the time we brought him back when he was 18, again, I started thinking, okay, what can we do? Can he live at home? Can he live in a sober living house? What's appropriate? And thus began this whole trajectory through the board and care system. And some people know that I ended up writing a little manual on the board and care system that started to be passed around NAMI. In fact, it eventually made its way to the LA County Board of Supervisors, but I wanted other parents to be forewarned. This is what you can expect if you put your adult son or daughter in a board and care. And I kept thinking like the holy grail that I just needed to find the right board and care. So that took a while for me to understand that there's a baseline where they all function at, and they're not terribly therapeutic places. Some people on this call may have their son or daughter in a board and care, and sometimes that's what you need to do. Sometimes that's appropriate. Sometimes your loved one cannot live at home and what have you. But what I learned is that my son got worse at the board and cares. So throughout our journey of more than 10 years of it being mostly downhill straight, we eventually tried to utilize the services of FSP, Full Service Partnership. In fact, at the time it was TAY-FSP, Traditional Age Youth. That's the FSP program that's for 18 to 24-year-olds. We were on the verge of using AOT, Assisted Outpatient Treatment. I was impressed, with what we saw, but my son got hospitalized before they could really take over. We had numerous hospitalizations, all with really wild experiences. And then ultimately, my son ended up homeless on Skid Row, and that was horrific. I went through a lot of spiritual changes. My son did, certainly, although he really doesn't have insight. So he didn't have an epiphany himself about how being homeless was really unacceptable. I was running kind of an experiment to see if he would learn from the experience, but within a few days, I knew that he wasn't. So thus began another search for emergency shelter and care and whatnot. So the memoir chronicles all of these experiences and my exasperation with the lack of care, the lack of continuity in the mental health care system, what kinds of conversations a parent or any family member has with themselves when they're dealing with this. It's like, I've talked to people where we say things like, I can't die in peace, knowing that, my son or daughter is this unstable, or making every decision in our own lives based, like a litmus test on how is this going to affect our disabled loved one. Now, I know, with the people on the call that you have family members with various levels of functionality. And I spoke specifically to schizophrenia, but there's some really, wild stuff that can go on with people who have bipolar disorder. There's a spectrum for all of these. Some people are high functioning, some people aren't. I didn't make it extremely obvious in my memoir, but I have a little side issue and agenda in my own personal advocacy about educating higher functioning peers to know that there are lower functioning people who need more care and maybe sometimes involuntary treatment. Sounds like a dirty word. So what works for one person doesn't work for another. And I'd like people to understand that better as well. So without going into any other area that I might want to talk about, does anybody have a comment or a question they might have for me? I think I saw something come in, but maybe my Sharon or Tim will ask the question for us.
I don't see any questions here. Patricia Hernandez sent the website for the Department of Mental Health. So I don't see any question.
Oh, okay. I thought I saw a couple things come in.
What is FFP?
There were a couple questions.
What is FFP?
Okay, FSP stands for Full Service Partnership. And these are agencies that contract with the Department of Mental Health. And they're set up regionally in those different service areas of LA County. And it's a voluntary program. And when somebody is not doing well, like for instance, with my son, we finally reached out to FSP when my son had been evicted from so many board and cares that it was hard to even place him. And I said to him, we need help. We need the Department of Mental Health to help us find a place for you to live now. And he only agreed to meet with the FSP if they would, find him housing, which is, one of the services they provide. So if somebody agrees to have FSP, they get a therapist and they get a case manager who visit the person once a week wherever they live. They also get a psychiatrist who they meet with monthly. So first they do an assessment, they come out to where the person lives, they tell them, what they'd like to do for the person. And again, my son really wasn't interested in them helping him find a job or anything like that. But he said, yeah, my mom said you'd help me find a place to live. So they work with people at whatever level they're at. They did towards the end try to pique his interest about maybe doing a little volunteer work or get a little job, but he wasn't at that level at all. We were still trying to get him to stay stable in some housing. And so the FSP program will go on for a while, but they do taper off. I've said in some of my more blunt interviews, like I can say it now, that I sometimes feel like the mental health care system suffers from anosognosia, lack of insight, because they'll taper somebody off of treatment when they're doing well, kind of like the way a mentally ill person wants to go off their medication when they're doing well. And some people do need ongoing care. It can't end. But this is what we have for now. We have the FSP program. And then I was going to say, for those who don't know, if somebody is on an even more desperate level, there's AOT, assisted outpatient treatment. They come to visit somebody who has not been on their meds, who may have had problems with the law, who has been recently hospitalized, who's really out of control. And if they go to visit the person and they say, no, I'm not interested in your help, they won't take no for an answer for a while. They'll keep coming back for a month or two and try to garner some trust and some interest. And then they even have a little legal maneuver where they can get a court order for treatment for someone who's that non-compliant. And
Here's another question.
Mm-hmm.
What do you recommend for shelter if you can't care for your adult child at home? What do you recommend for shelter, like immediate shelter?
Well, there are some immediate like crisis residential places. In fact, when I was living in LA, there was an Office of Patients' Rights. You to this day, you can probably still call the Department of Mental Health. They have a number of different offices. I think the one in West LA is on Sepulveda and Olympic, but there are case managers who can direct people towards some housing. Now, when it comes to the board and care system, um, you got to do what you got to do. If you really don't feel like it's safe for somebody to live at home, if you don't feel like it's therapeutic for somebody to live at home, I could really make them worse. There are those scenarios. Then maybe they do need to be in a board and care. And there's a website, ccld.gov, where you can look up board and cares. My manual might be floating around still, which has actually now it's probably some outdated links, but just buyer beware when it comes to the board and cares. They're not particularly therapeutic environments. So if somebody does need to be in one, I would say also supply your loved one maybe with their own therapist, maybe get somebody like a peer coach involved who can take them out and socialize with them or take them to a guitar lesson. They need help. Just dumping somebody at a board and care is probably not going to be good. Some of these board and cares, they're filthy, they're dilapidated, the food is not healthy, there's crime, there's drug dealing. I mean, we had a bad experience in 9 different board and cares. And yet there are some that are decent, some that are better than others, but you have to see what the vacancies are. And I've been privy to see some board of supervisor reports that came out in the last year or two talking about the dire straits that board and cares are in right now. And there's a lot that are closing. They accept SSI benefits as full room and board. And that's $1,000 a month, 30 something dollars a day for your loved one. So you can tell what kind of treatment they're going to get. And they need a budget of roughly twice of what they're getting for many of these board and cares to stay afloat. So there are things happening. There's been, some advocates working to get more funds from the MHA, Mental Health Services Act. Dr. Sharon at the Department of Mental Health has, he's got his attention pulled in a lot of different directions, but there are some new housing specialists, and I'm involved with a little group of mom advocates who are, starting to sort of blow the whistle on what the failures are of the hospitals and the IMDs and the FSPs, and housing is a big issue. I wish I had, the answers, but my son ended up homeless. Putting your son or daughter in their own apartment is very dicey if they're not stable and on medication. But if they are, that might be better than a board and care. So
Can you tell them, Kartar, about your experience in a downtown shelter with your son, where you paid for beds for him, a bed for a week or two, and he didn't use the bed?
Oh, what that one, we didn't have to pay for that. That was, there are shelters on Skid Row, and my son was in Union Mission. We tried to get him in there, and they say they never refuse a female, and they even have an upstairs for families, and they have a certain number of cots, for men. And I had gotten my son signed up. It was supposed to be very temporary. As it turned out, he preferred to stay outside on the sidewalk, even though he had a cot for 2 weeks reserved. So that was a whole thing unto itself. But, there are these shelters, and at least with Union Rescue Mission, I was in there. It's the only one I went in. I don't want to say it's wholesome inside, but it's safe. They have guards at the front door. You don't have to worry about being assaulted inside that shelter. But outside, outside it's a third world country, and it's very, very upsetting and kind of wild. Um, it's just totally different. So a shelter is kind of a last resort. And in fact, even at the shelters, they do have social workers that come there, and they do try to find more permanent housing for people. They have some doctors, they have podiatrists and dentists. You know, it depends on how long somebody's going to be at that shelter. But one of my more exasperating experiences, which I relayed in the memoir, I called one emergency number. It was a shelter in Hollywood. They called me back 3 months later. I didn't even remember I'd called them. It's like, what? 3 months later, you're calling me?
Here's a
My,
few questions for you, Qatar. One of them is, how is your son doing now? And does he have a drug addiction problem?
okay. My son was actually formally diagnosed. His main diagnosis is schizophrenia, but his secondary axis 2 is polysubstance abuse disorder. And so he was never addicted to any one substance. He would try anything and everything. He actually told me that he's tried everything except heroin. And crystal meth is extremely popular with the mentally ill and the homeless. I try to be understanding, because when somebody's on an antipsychotic that is like a horse tranquilizer and they're sleeping 12 hours a day, you can sort of understand why somebody would want to be on uppers, or why they might drink 10 cups of coffee a day or guzzle energy drinks. They're trying to feel alive and awake and normal. So my son, you know, dabbled in a lot. And in fact, he also started smoking pot when he was probably, well, maybe even younger than 13. He eventually in therapy admitted that he was smoking pot maybe 3 or 4 times a week, starting when he was about 13. When, where? Well, it turns out that when I would drop him off early for school, he would miss first period and be smoking pot probably somewhere around the school or the neighborhood. And of course, a lot of people do feel that marijuana can be a trigger for some people predisposed to mental illness to open up the door to psychosis. So it is what it is. And so at this point, his addiction is cigarettes. It's under control now based on where he lives, but he had been smoking up to 3 packs a day, which is almost a chain smoker. And I used to say to people that his smoking was worse than the schizophrenia, because his addiction to smoking was making him sell everything he owned, including clothes. Everything that I got him, he sold, and he was panhandling like crazy just for the cigarettes. So
here's several people have asked the same question, Qatar.
okay.
Question is, what is the advocacy mom group that you are part of? I heard you mention it in another meeting. I'd like to join that group.
Yeah. Well, we actually might be convening on the project that we've been working on for a few months now, but you know, people can always follow up with me and I'll let you know. But basically, a number of us had gotten together with similar frustrations with our sons in IMDs and the way that they were treated and the arbitrary rules of the IMDs. Like right now, some of you might have someone in an IMD. Some of you don't know, but IMD is Institute of Mental Disease. And this is where people go when they've been conserved, they've been discharged from the hospital. There's about a dozen of these IMDs. They're locked facilities, and people are in them for 6 months to a couple of years usually. And they're not even therapeutic. That's like the end of the road where the therapy really should be administered. But as an example, my son was told that he couldn't have a therapist because he didn't have Medicare. He only had Medi-Cal. With COVID, it's been particularly brutal, where parents can't even visit their son or daughter. Prior to that, when people were able to visit, they'd put you in this little room with other family members and you'd be shouting to have a conversation with your son or daughter. You know, there's people who can't even go outside and touch grass. I mean, it's like they're in prison. So we created this little mom group to basically list all of the, you know, the things that have gone wrong. We call it failures in standards of care. And there's a new medical director at the Department of Mental Health, LA County, Dr. Amanda Ruiz. And we're on the verge of getting ready to give her this report that lists all of our bad experiences, in hopes that when she negotiates these contracts, that she's going to hold these IMDs to be more accountable. Now, that's all what advocacy is. I mean, you're an advocate for your son or daughter or your other family member, brother or sister who's mentally ill, when you just simply try to get questions answered, when you try to get them to a therapist, when you try to get them housing, you're an advocate. And then there's all these other levels. There's people who are advocating, with their legislators and trying to get this law changed and that law changed. But, we wanted to address the issues that we know about the best, which is that there's a serious lack of appropriate housing. Housing without therapy is a recipe for disaster. Then, what goes on in these hospitals and these psychiatric locked facilities is great room for improvement, we'll say that. And, even something simple, like for instance, as parents, we know our loved one better than anybody. And yet the psychiatrists don't have time for even a 30-second phone call. And sometimes we can deliver really critical information that our loved one who has a thought disorder cannot convey to them. So the HIPAA laws and everything needs to change. So with this little moms group, we were documenting, this is what happened, this is what we feel is wrong, and this is what we think should change. And now that we've completed this project, some people might go on to other things. Like there's two ladies in the group that really want to kind of start their own, I don't even want to call it a board and care, but their own residential program, because we're so fed up with what's happening with the board and cares, the licensed board and cares. And at the same time, we don't like to see them closing either. It's like all these programs are closing or shutting down. We need something is better than nothing, but they all can improve. There are also other advocacy groups that work on a national level. There's one called the National Shattering Silence Coalition. It's mostly mothers, I believe, who are working on a national level to change laws and address certain issues. And if something's going on in one particular state or with one particular person, they'll kind of rally around that person. Like, for instance, there's this story of this man in Northern California who's been mentally ill for decades. He's blind and he's been hit by a car twice. And the governmental agencies in that city and county will not let his sister be his conservator. So this stuff borders on, sociopathy here. It's cruel. And so some of these national organizations will rally behind, a specific person and case. There's also the Treatment Advocacy Center, TAC.org. And there's also a group called California Advocates. I didn't join them, but I started getting some of their emails. So they work with NAMI California and beyond, trying to get some good things to change as well.
Can I back up and ask a question? For the FSP and the AOP. AOT, I'm sorry. Is there eligibility criteria in terms of income or insurance?
No, these are free. These don't cost anything. They're actually funded partially, if not completely, by the Mental Health Services Act, Prop 63 from 2004, the millionaire's tax, which is supposed to go towards, programs to help people with serious mental illness. They don't cost anything. I can remember going, I'm getting an echo. I can remember going to a West LA NAMI speaker's presentation. And I'm trying to think when it was. It must have been around 2015. And a gentleman came to speak and he says, we now have AOT here in LA County, and their schedule was booked 2 months in advance immediately. That may not be the case now. Maybe they have filled out their program and they have more, AOT agencies. But, You could go and online and find out what their criteria is. But with AOT, it's basically the people who have failed with the FSP program, or they have been completely non-compliant and they try really hard. They've gone out to meet people who are homeless. They meet people wherever they are, and they try to create a trust and companionship with that person. I mean, it starts out very simple, like, hi, do you want a cup of coffee, or can I get you a burger, or do you need some clothes? They used to give my son art supplies and a radio, and then they try to involve them in some therapy and housing.
I just want to say the name of the person for AOT that represents NAMI Westside LA is Malik Tate. That's MALIKTATE. So if you pursue AOT for your ill relative, get a hold of Malik Tate. I'm sure you can find his number through the Department of Mental Health.
That rings a bell. I think that was the same guy that came and spoke.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, you were there, Kartar. I remember.
Yes.
Any other questions? I can't see the questions. I can't see them anymore. Something happened to my Zoom. So maybe Tim, is there any other questions, or Aaron for Kartar?
Well, as a matter of fact, I did have a question which I put in here. I'm wondering, Kartar, what's been the most effective treatment you feel your son has received over the years? Like where has he experienced the greatest progress?
Well, you know, the happy ending right now is that he's in a private program. And there are private programs around the country, not very many. Most of them are cost prohibitive. There are literally programs that cost $10,000 to $20,000 per month for very wealthy people. But my son is lucky that he was on a waiting list for 3 years to get into the John Henry Foundation in Santa Ana. And some of the people on the call know that I moved to Irvine a year and a half ago, not because my son's there, but certainly not in spite of it. And so I can, drive over to him very easily. The John Henry Foundation is affordable for sure for what they offer. And he's doing well there because he's in a genuinely therapeutic environment. They have a schedule. The staff is highly trained. They have exercise. They have healthy food. They have stimulating activities. They have fun things that the people like to do. I mean, before COVID, they had a calendar where 7 days a week they're chauffeuring people to Disneyland, Starbucks, Barnes and Noble, shopping center, things that people want to do, actually. There's a few people there who work. Like my son just recently told me that he met a guy who he hardly ever sees at John Henry because the guy works part-time as a mechanic, and he ended up cutting my son's hair. But there's a few people there that have been there 15 or more years. Some people live there 3-5 years.
Kartar, don't you have to have the diagnosis of schizophrenia to
Yes.
be accepted there?
Yes.
So it's not for everybody, John.
Correct. However, they do have calls all the time. People want to know, like, what's your model of recovery? There are people, they started out taking people with bipolar disorder, but they found that mix of bipolar disorder and schizophrenia was not so good. But they're a model of recovery that other people have patterned themselves after. In fact, our little moms group invited a man in Mesa, Arizona, who created also, families got together, they created a housing program called Lighthouse. They have their information online. And I honestly think that that's what's going to take. I think that realistically, some people, to get what you really want for your loved one, you may want to band together with other parents and create your own therapeutic housing. And that's why my son is doing better. I was shocked that he agreed to the rules, which included limiting his smoking, and he has to smoke on breaks when they tell him. But he also has eyes and ears. I mean, he could see that it was a very nice, clean, lovely environment with people speaking kindly to him. And he wanted to give it a try. He could compare it to the practically the crack houses that he was living in that called themselves board and cares, you know. So he knew, he could tell. Mom and dad were there like we were taking him for a college interview. But that's why he's doing better.
Any other questions? Any other questions?
Yeah, yes, thank you.
Oh, Dick.
Your mom's group that are interested in residential. I'm sure that there are many people on this call that are very interested in that also, and especially looking at models that are a step up from what the board and care can offer.
Mm-hmm.
And I would be interested, I'm not a mother, I'm a father.
Right.
I would be interested in getting information or seeing if that group wants to, reach out, because I think this community is full of people who are aching for that type of situation for their loved one.
Right.
And,
well, yeah. In fact, one of our other projects, probably for 2021, is to create a petition where also other family members can let the Department of Mental Health know their stories. I mean, we've told them that what we're saying is a composite of what hundreds or maybe even thousands of people have been through. And the same goes for housing, where everybody's very frustrated. And one of the biggest hurdles, of course, is real estate. You know, the cost of purchasing
Right.
a home or renting a home with a landlord understanding who the residents will be. In fact, there's that shared collaborative housing going on in LA County. And I think that what they do is a godsend, although they have people who are higher functioning living in that group living format. And so for somebody who needs a person to hand them their medication and who needs more supervision, the shared collaborative housing model isn't enough. But that's a beginning. You know, they rent homes and they also compensate the landlord with a little extra money to cover all the other costs. So when people get together, grassroots level, like a co-op, it can be done. So there were two ladies in our group who were thinking, you know, we have to focus on our own housing because God only knows when things are going to improve, you know, through the public system. Yeah. So what I'm thinking is, for those who are interested, maybe the easiest thing would be for people to just email me, tell me you're interested, and then I can parlay your contact information to the two ladies who want to head that up for their own sons, who are both languishing in IMDs, not getting better. They're both conservators. And I think if they had something going for their sons, they would take them out of the IMDs. So one of my easier email, I have several, but is kartardiamond@gmail.com. So Kartar, you can see it. My first name is Kartar, Diamond, like the jewel, DIAMOND @gmail.com. Yeah, give me your name, phone number, email me. Let me know if you want to join in on some housing. Let's get some housing together.
Yeah. I mean, as you alluded to, the LA County system of care is it's worse than what we saw in Washington today, in my opinion. And it's I have thoughts of getting there without having to depend on the Department of Mental Health, because they're going to be slow. They are slow. They're not getting better. And I know there are a lot of people out there who are looking for the step up from a board and care, exactly as you're describing. And I know there are an awful lot of loved ones on this call who would need and would be very interested. And I will be emailing you my information, and hopefully it can supplement what they're doing.
Absolutely. And, you know, I've created some social media accounts, And on my noahsschizophrenia.com, I've got a Facebook account, and I just a day or two ago posted an interview that this lady in Venice, she was interviewed by Epoch Times, where she had the inside track on all of the housing first building that's going on. And she, for instance, she knows that a lot of the homeless are mentally ill. And she was also saying how ridiculous it is, what a scam that these contractors are making almost $1 million per unit. We're talking about, like 250 square unit space for somebody to live in, and how expensive it is. I can remember several years back saying to Dr. Sharon, why don't you just get some cheap land in Lancaster and buy some mobile homes? Let's get this show on the road. Why take 10 years, and why does it have to cost millions and millions and millions of dollars? But if individual families co-op together, you'll have a lot more control of the quality and what really goes on. We all know that our loved ones need to be in low stress environments at the very least. Why the heck are they in these huge buildings with 100 people and noise and across from train tracks? I mean, it's all counterproductive.
And hospitals are the least healing place you can put someone who's psychotic. They're isolated, they're bright lights, the bright lights in hospitals, the noise. It's so disturbing to someone who's psychotic. It's not calm and peaceful at all in a hospital.
No.
And
So
we
know, as family members, we know what they need.
Kartar, just to segue, I just want to thank you. Your book was amazing. And it really hit home. I have a question, and that is, I recall, I may be wrong, but that you have 2 other children that are girls, and
maybe in another dimension. You're thinking of Miriam Feldman.
Yes, I am thinking of Miriam Feldman. Okay.
I read her memoir too. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm getting them confused. I apologize. Okay. So Noah's an only child, is that?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So you're next then on my list. I apologize. I wanted to ask about the sibling dynamic, but clearly that's not applicable.
Right. I mean, I mentioned it in passing, not as our experience, but because I've been to so many family support meetings that siblings have survivor's guilt. There's a lot that goes on. Sometimes they end up being the main caretaker. Sometimes the parents are so checked out and overwhelmed, or maybe they're ill and they're elderly and they just can't handle it anymore. So it falls in the lap of the brother or the sister. And I try in my memoir to dispense, just some hints and some advice about whether or not it's really appropriate to ask, a sibling to be the conservator or the caretaker, and preserving just a brother-sister relationship, that kind of a thing. So yeah, every part of the family, every member of the family is affected. What's different about, for people who did read Miriam's book, which I loved, it was such a beautiful mosaic of imagery. She really is an artist with words. But in her story, it seemed like their family took care of their son a little bit more privately, and they set him up in an apartment. Whereas I really started to rely on the mental health care system more and tried to take advantage of all these programs and services. And I ended up being, misled and disappointed left and right. So my memoir is different from hers in that I really explain this whole process of working with the system and what it taught me, and what people should be aware of and what they should not put up with. I put up with a lot of stuff, which in retrospect, I would not do the same thing over again. I can tell you that. And so when you learn about the mistakes I made, you can hopefully proceed quicker with your own family and not have those setbacks. Yeah.
Well, Kartar, your communication and your thoughtfulness in regards to all the family members you're talking to tonight, and your thoughtfulness in regards to your son, is very inspirational and gives us hope, because you're not just a survivor, you're a mother that thrives and fights for the best for her son. And I sure hope that the moms who want residential housing one day can develop that. I so hope that happens. If there's any way we can help, I don't know, because NAMI's not loaded with money. You know, we just struggle to stay alive ourselves. So your book is very inspirational. I loved it. I felt you described a mother's suffering better than any book I'd ever read. So I
Thank
really
you.
appreciate the book very much. Any other comments or questions? Anything? If there isn't, I'd like to, if anybody has any comments or questions, I want to thank you. And I'd like to announce about our February meeting, our February speakers meeting. We're having a professor from San Francisco, a PhD, teaching us about laws you need to know to understand rules and program for your mentally ill relatives. The laws you need to know, the California laws, the county laws. We thought maybe you could use an education on that.
Sharon, I also wanted to ask, because I think a lot of people did have questions for you, Kartar. Are you okay if they reach out to you after the,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
did you already put your email in the
I
chat
put her
box?
email in the chat and I'll do so again. So
Okay.
everyone has your contact information to reach you, Kartar. Thank you for being
Oh,
open to that.
for sure. Absolutely.
So engaging, Kartar. Thank you so much.
I love this. What a great way to start the year.
Mhm.
On what a day. At least we're ending on a good note, right?
This story gives us hope. Today,
Yeah.
today is,
This was good counter programming to the.
well, the election in Georgia was nothing short of a miracle. A Black man and a Jew got elected over two Republicans. I mean, what could be better than that, you know?
That they live in Georgia. Hey.
Amazing.
Yeah. And I hope they solved it. I think Trump should maybe be arrested and taken out of the White House because it's sedition what he did today.
Well, we're veering a little off course here, but
I know. I'm not.
Remember, we have to be
We'll allow it.
compassionate towards all mental illnesses. So
Yeah.
Yes.
Well,
And
Kartar, you make a
today's
valid point.
activity, in Washington, D.C., it's very upsetting and it's very scary. And so it may be triggering for some people. So even from NAMI National, we kind of said you can always text NAMI to 741-741. That's a 24/7 text line. So if you want to have a resource, you can always text NAMI to 741-741. So some people might feel really unsettled with what's happening today. So there are resources out there. I'd also like to just take a quick moment to thank Janis Black-Warner for this lovely speaker series. Thank you so much for hosting and giving us your generous donations and commitment to advocacy, to bringing these fabulous speakers, and also to our co-president Sharon Dunas, who just continues to light the way for us. And thank you for just really curating such a wonderful series of fabulous speakers like yourself, Kartar. So thank you everyone for coming tonight and just showing up, just being here. I just want to say we had about 67 people here at one time, and that's just awesome. Can we just get a little, that's so
Yay.
Kartar,
great.
a round of applause.
You
And
know?
I want to thank Janis Black-Warner also for our campaign, our fundraising campaign, Be Kind to Another Mind. I don't know if you all got that letter from NAMI Los Angeles. Janis Black-Warner helped design that, helped put the words in it, and it was beautiful. I hope we raise some money from that. Thank you, Janis, for that.
And Erin, thank you for putting that together. And thank you, Kartar. You were fabulous.
oh, thank you. This was fun.
You know, we have to smile and laugh, and we have to have a brighter 2021, all of us.
We do.
All right.
Okay, so may the threat of this virus end sometime in June, May or June or July. May it end. And may we all know peace of mind in this new year and experience safety and security and connection with those that we love.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you,
God bless
Sharon.
all of you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody. Good night, Kartar. Thank you again.
Thank you,
Thank
Tim.
you.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Erin. Everybody, thank you.
You are our biggest draw, I have to say.
Yeah. In a couple of years, we do more peripheral with you, Kartar, than we have in a couple of years.
Oh, show us your book. Show us your book.
Here's the book.
Is it on
Amazon.com.
Amazon?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, here it is.
It's a great
Beautiful.
cover,
No
Kartar.
schizophrenia.
This is
Oh,
a-
we didn't talk about the cover. Yeah.
Do you have a link to the Amazon where we can find it on Amazon or anything like that?
The link is a mile long, but if you Google Noah's Schizophrenia or my name, all my books come up, so it'll show up pretty easily.
Okay. Let's go there.
Well, let's buy this book to help.
Thank you.
Kartar.
Oh, look at Elizabeth. Elizabeth just put it in the chat box.
Oh, she got it.
Oh,
Thank
wow.
you. More
Elizabeth
tech
is
savvy than me.
Does Noah
Miracle
have stigma, or does he let you talk about him?
He doesn't know I've written this book, and he may one day. And his real name isn't Noah. So I've tried to maintain his privacy on that level. And he's not interested right now. That's not on his radar, but maybe one day he'll be interested in knowing that I wrote about this.
Well, thank you for sharing. And Sharon, thank you for putting this together. Thank you.